Yeah, sir, you can.
Isha, can you start recording?
Started.
Good evening, everyone. I am Athavakanti, a member of Interim Committee of Political Science Association. First, let me give you a brief introduction to Political Science Association. PSA is a student-led body that aims to sensitize people on various socio-political issues. We have conducted numerous sessions and activities like Human Rights Week and Youth Parliament. This year, on occasion of India entering 75th year of independence, it's celebrating August as Independence Month. Today is the first session on Independence Month titled Shaping Peace Together. And without further ado, let me introduce today's speaker, Professor Sudhakar Solomonraj. Sudhakar sir is professor at Wilson College and he is head of Political Science Department. He is also a nature educator and conservationist. He represented India he represented Western region as part of Indian team at Silver Jubilee celebration of Worldwide Fund for Nature International at Asissi in Italy. He has been associated with Silent Valley Movement and Narmada Bachao Andolan. Century Asia awarded him Green Teacher Award in 2010 and he is author of Living Nature. Sir, it's great to have you. And an important note here that this session will be followed by question answer round. So I request every participant to please unmute when only identified. So let's begin the session. Over to you, sir.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this particular session of Peace Day. The idea of Peace Day in Wilson College goes back, I think, to 1996 or 1995, and we have had something to do on Peace Day continuously since then. One part of Peace Day is commemorating the kind of human tragedy which happened at Hiroshima, when so many people just got vaporized. And a lot of the survivors, sometimes for 2 or 3 generations, there was this problem of radiation. And between 1945 and 1969, one saw the some of the most aggressive arms race, where 1945 the bomb was what we call the fusion bomb, okay, an atom bomb. By 1948, US and other countries had begun what is called the hydrogen bomb. And then they went on to neutron bomb. And therefore, in terms of nuclear capacity, if you look at Russia, Russia has some of the world's biggest nuclear weapons, which is maybe about 2,000-3,000 times deadlier than the first atom bomb. So, in the around 2010, etc., a lot of people said the world has enough nuclear weapons to destroy it 35 times over. So in terms of the nuclear weapons, the challenge is extremely significant. And when you look at the history of nuclear weapons from 1945 to 1972, the idea was what is called nuclear weapons was developed as what we call nuclear deterrence. What is nuclear deterrence? I have nuclear weapons, you have nuclear weapons. Both know how destructive it will be. So both of us will not really use it against each other. So the idea of deterrence meant that, it could, it was more as a kind of deterrence against attack. But as deterrence is still a problem, because if somebody triggered it off, nuclear weapons have this thing called the MAD, mutually assured destruction. And therefore, that's one part of it. And then, of course, France, UK, China. Okay. And so for a long time, these 5 countries had nuclear weapons. In 1968, for the first time, there was a nuclear non-proliferation treaty. About 55 countries joined. And they said for 25 years, we'll not develop nuclear weapons. In 1904, there was an attempt to have a comprehensive test ban treaty, along with a new treaty of permanent nuclear non-proliferation. Uh, you know, uh, I think about 172 countries agreed to sign. Countries like India, countries like Iran, Israel, Pakistan, North Korea did not sign. India was one of the countries which was negotiating, and because India was one of the earlier sponsors of an attempt to have a comprehensive test ban treaty, and therefore India needed to be a signatory. India said we will sign, but if we sign, we want all countries to declare a moratorium, a completion of nuclear weapons by 2020. So India says it's unfair if we decide not to have nuclear weapons, and those who have nuclear weapons continue to have nuclear weapons. The logic for having, of asking people not to have nuclear weapons. For a country like India, the logic for nuclear weapons is that if China has nuclear weapons, Pakistan is on the cusp of developing nuclear weapons. So therefore, India, for its own defense, will need nuclear weapons. Similarly, if you look at a country like Iran, Iran says that Israel has a secret nuclear weapons program, which most people know, but officially no one accept. And therefore, it's war in the region. We need to have some kind of deterrence. And also because Iran sees Israel as a country which should not exist because it deprived the Palestinian Arabs of their very rights. So there are a lot of issues involved there. So when you're talking about this whole question of nuclear weapons, so India, Pakistan, both of us developed nuclear weapons in 1998, and of course, countries in principle agreed we will not have what is called a no first use principle. And because we are using it for defense, we will really, unless provoked, unless there's a threat to our very existence, we will not use it. So when you talk about nuclear weapons, one is of course having nuclear weapons. Then there's having delivery systems. So how do you really deliver nuclear weapons in terms of, at the fastest rate? Therefore, somewhere in the 1960s, USA, USSR developed something called the multiple, they're called re-entry vehicles. What are re-entry vehicles? They're ballistic missiles. What's a ballistic missile? A ballistic missile is something which leaves the Earth's atmosphere, flies through space and re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. And therefore, people began to develop ballistic missiles. And some of them had ballistic missiles with multiple warheads. Then they have multiple, they have ballistic missiles which would have multiple nuclear warheads. Because once you have add a nuclear weapon to it, the weights becomes heavier, and therefore to deliver that in terms of you must have so much of velocity to leave the Earth's atmosphere. So therefore, all these are things which have developed. Now, countries like USA, Soviet Union, developed something called the Intercontinental ballistic missiles. Ballistic missiles which would have a range of 10 to 20,000 kilometers. Okay, so like USA could have a ballistic missile which could, target all the important cities in Russia, and similarly in Soviet Union or Russia, and similarly Soviet Union also had that kind of capacity. Most countries would have short, medium-range nuclear missiles. So a lot of India's nuclear missiles is from short to medium range. We don't really have long-range missiles. But you can use these missiles for traditional, conventional warfare. So if you look at the US, in terms of they have conventional missile like cruise and Pershing, which can be used without nuclear warheads. But there is a threat of that. The problem is that when you're talking about nuclear missiles, they come under what is called weapons of mass destruction. So if you have two countries which have equal kind of resource, they are both worried about damaging each other. What if there's a proliferation of nuclear weapons? So North Korea has, and North Korea also has ballistic missiles which can target cities in Japan, which can target cities in South Korea. It can also target Guam, which is a nuclear base in the Pacific of the. It is a U.S. Army base in the Pacific, or what is called the Western Pacific. And therefore, the world becomes more and more unstable as more countries have nuclear weapons. And when certain countries are pushed to the wall, they may use nuclear weapons in countries around them, which could trigger off a larger nuclear war. If countries have, allies and things like that. So therefore, we are looking at this whole issue of, in terms of from 45 to now. The problem has just become, far more serious. One of the important things we need to understand is that is the use of nuclear missiles a crime against humanity? Is the use of nuclear missiles, nuclear weapons, a crime against humanity? What is a crime against humanity? So crime against humanity is in terms of when there is genocide, mass killing. So what are the numbers which we look at mass killing? So if you say 10,000, that's mass killing. So if you look at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, directly 40,000 and 60,000 people died. But over a period of time, lakhs of people died. Wouldn't that count as war crimes? Of course, in 1945, there was the International Court of Criminal Justice. We have an International Court of Criminal Justice. But if you are a country which is strong and you are on the victorious side, you will not really even want it to be acknowledged as something as in terms of a mass killing. So Hiroshima is a reminder of what can go wrong in war. Because war is about fight between combatants. Targeting. So in World War II, for the first time, this line between combat and civilians was blurred. And right from 1941 and 42, where where Germany bombed London and other cities in UK. But Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in that sense, were, Japan had lost most of the battles in the Pacific. Already, cities in Japan were being firebombed. So the question was the nuclear bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki necessary? And therefore, of course, Soviet Union believed that, when you look at the Second World War, from 1943, USA, USSR and UK were part of Big Three. They were collectively fight to defeat Japan and Germany. And therefore, they said there will also get details of new weapons developed. So, but Germany was also in a race to develop nuclear weapons. Japan was, Soviet Union was, in USA. Japan and USA were very close. Japan did not have enriched uranium, which Germany was trying to send before Germany was defeated in the war. And therefore, there was this race even then. So, USA said that an atom bomb is not a bomb in the traditional sense. It's not an explosive. It's a device. So, when you talk about these weapon systems, because these are basically nuclear reactions, they are not explosions. So, a lot of times when you are talking about laws which prevent the expansion of these arsenals, countries will find ways to escape it. So in 1994, when there was this attempt to have a comprehensive test ban treaty. Around that time, France was still testing in the French islands in the Pacific. And Greenpeace, sent one of its small ships called the Rainbow Warrior to try and stop it. And of course, the Rainbow Warrior was sunk. It became such an international crisis, and France discontinued nuclear testing. So the question now is in terms of what is the way forward. And in terms of, if we as people we are saying that how to shape peace together. To shape peace, what is a commitment to peace? To shape how much is our understanding of what I call real politics, the politics of power. Because otherwise, a lot of peace movements can be very naive. It can be just statement of intent. How do we influence policy? So in one of my political science class about this person called Harish Kapadia. Harish Kapadia is a very important and it's a very interesting mountaineer. He also is a mountaineer who's promoting the idea of peace parks. So what are peace parks? Wherever there is, on the border conflict between two countries, if the disputed area can be converted into a peace park where there are no soldiers, where civilians can meet, chat, tensions can be diffused. So one area where there's a lot of tension is along what we call the LOC, line of control, between India and Pakistan. And along the line of control is Siachen Glacier. And Siachen Glacier is a source of a lot of rivers. And if you go to Siachen, of course, the human beings are living, soldiers are there, so there's a lot of contamination. A lot of snow melt is coming and feeding into the river. So he says that there are unspent there are spells, there's a lot of diesel generators, drums and all of that. So kind of pollution is seeping. So he said, can we get Siachen Glacier to be declared as a peace park? The word realpolitik is one word. REALPOLITIK is one word, realpolitik. Realpolitik is a politics of power. But given the kind of confrontation between India and Pakistan, the idea of having a peace park is unrealistic. Okay. Neither India or Pakistan will agree to such a thing. Especially India won't, because India occupies the higher ridges in Siachen Glacier. But Siachen Glacier is something which also, if you know the cost of maintaining Siachen Glacier for India, it's about 4,000 crores a year. Because you have to constantly shift, because soldiers can't spend more than 6-7 months, because the terrain is tough, the loneliness can get to you. Because there, oxygen is about 30 to 50% less, because you are between 17,000 and 27,000 feet. So across that, you are patrolling. Sometimes the force of wind is about kilometers. So it can just hit your bone. And therefore, in that kind of cold, and for 6-7 months, you're not meeting anybody but people in your bunkers. So it can really get to you. So, as I tell all students, about 30 to 40% of people who serve in Siachen Glacier often spend 6 to 12 months, sometime more, in the military asylum at Goa. So when you talk about conflict, war, it creates a lot of stress. So what is it that would take us to collectively shape peace? So therefore, in terms of two or three things I want to talk about. If you look at Europe, if you look at European history from the 19th and 20th century, France, Germany, and UK have always been at war. And after 1945 and from 1993, these three countries are part of the European Union. Of course, UK chose to quit in 2015. But the European Union has been an excellent example of lasting peace. Of course, the issues are complex because there's a collective security arrangement called NATO, which US is also an important part of. And the threat to Western Europe can come from Soviet, could come from erstwhile or former Soviet Union or Russia, and NATO is there as as a guarantor against such a thing. But what was said and done? The European Union meant that these countries are also dismantling their border checks. That's something which is so amazing if it can happen in South Asia. So why is it that India and Pakistan, we are at loggerheads? Now we hardly have any people-to-people contact. And from the perspective of India, we can always blame Pakistan and say they are the aggressors. You know, in 2005, there was a massive earthquake in Kashmir on both sides. I mean, which affected Kashmir, which is on this within the Indian border, and Pak-occupied Kashmir as well. There is an author who wrote a book called "From Stones to Schools." So he says in one of his books, he says that when we are doing relief supply, I mean, we're doing relief work. He said that our relief work was hampered because of constant bombardment from India. This person is not a Pakistani. He's an American who's who set up a lot of schools in remote areas of Pakistan, in the mountainous areas. In Gilgit, you can look at it, the author and his other books as well. And so therefore, his perspective is bombardment. And what we read in our papers is always the bombardment always starts with Pakistan. You know, in 2015 or 15, I remember having gone to with students to, there is a BSF post at a place, Surajgarh, I think it's called Surajgarh, which is about 25-30 kilometers from Jammu. If you ever go to Jammu, find that place and go. It's a BSF post. And earlier there used to be a station because that was a rail link to Sialkot in Pakistan. So the railway lines have been taken out, and there is a BSF post. And there are gates on both sides. In the middle, there is supposed to be a small no man land. And there's one interesting tree where half the trees in Pakistan, half the trees in India. And the first time I went in 2013, you could actually go around the tree and people say, oh, we have that. When I went back in 2017, they couldn't go because they put barbed wire, because people who went in terms of, climbing the tree and, it could have created a crisis. But one of the BSF soldiers, he said sometimes they're firing and sometimes we fire. And he says in the last firing we killed 120 people on that side. And this was a BSF soldier telling me whether he was making it, but he was actually telling me. A lot of it doesn't get covered. I remember about 2-3 years ago, because some Indian soldiers and one Indian soldier, two Indian soldiers got beheaded on the LOC and the border. And remember some journalists saying that we should take this as a pinch of salt because there are similar stories from the other side. So we will need to first, check our own prejudices. Can we create communities of peace? Sometimes I think I don't have too many new stories to share, but there are some stories I share which which I'll keep repeating. I remember 98 or 99 we were doing whitewater rafting in the Bias, which is near Manali. And in my raft there was one person. He was living in Pune, but he's basically from Kerala. So in my raft, he said, "Where is this water going?" I said, "The water is going to Pakistan." So he started spitting into the water. And he said, "We should dirty the water." I said, "Why? It's going to Pakistan." I said, "Why?" No, we should not get good water. I said, "Have you ever been to Pakistan?" No. "Have you ever met a Pakistani?" No. "Has Pakistan done anything to you?" No. Then why? No, they are like that. So we have built this whole thing about the kind of, in our consciousness. And very often it's politically expedient. But as young people, I always tell people all of you, my generation, to pay compensation to repair damaged world. When I say damaged world, I'm not just talking about environment. I'm also talking about the kind of legacy of hate we are leaving, which is a scary part. If a lot of young people feel that, we should not be friends with Pakistan, we should not have any links, where has this hatred come from? It's come from our generation. So we have failed as human beings. We should, as human beings, we must be able to see, capable of relating to all human beings. And we are seen as the land of the Buddha, compassionate Buddha, Mahavira, non-violence. So these are, difficult questions in terms of asking ourselves, what do we do? So how do we really overcome this deep-rooted hatred in our cultural psyche? It could be. So that is an important question. I always say that peace is not something which is an abstract thing. Peace is about something which each one of us can do something about. How do we create a better world? One of the exercises I do for on rights, there's an exercise in terms of, the question is that should underdeveloped nations have the right to develop nuclear weapons? The purpose of this question is in terms of a lot of poor countries, the priorities are in terms of, malnutrition, all these things, people related. So how do you, so therefore, if sending so much weapons, and also if you look at the 1993 Non-Proliferation Treaty, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, 170 countries have said they will not develop nuclear weapons. So it means, and there were countries like South Africa, Brazil, Argentina, which one time had a nuclear weapons program. So the possibility of us giving up nuclear weapons is a practical possibility. There are countries which have done it, and a large number of countries across the continents of the world. Then it is definitely possible. So I want us to here to look at what is it that can we do? What is it that we can do? Can we connect to student groups across countries of the world which are committed to peace and explore, collective action? Maybe start with countries that are not contentious. We can move to Pakistan later, but we can start with maybe Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, the other countries in the world. So we can all we'll all be enriched by each other's ideas. So the task which I give to everyone here on this session, especially the PSA, is how will you create communities of peace? How can we work? Okay. By the time we come to the Human Rights Week, can we have a global online session on peace? Because any kind of conflict denies rights. In most conflict areas, if you see, the most vulnerable are women. Because often rape is used by these and stronger groups to intimidate and humiliate the others. I'm not just talking about, even if you look at the problem in East Pakistan, Bangladesh, but you look at when there was this problem of conflict between two tribes in Rwanda, Hutus and Tutsis. Please watch the movie Hotel Rwanda, and maybe you can have a discussion on the movie Hotel Rwanda. So many people were hacked, and the number of women who were raped. Even in conflict situations in Kashmir, Manipur, there were instances of women being raped. Lots of them. Okay. There is this, find out which is the village in Kupwara district. The women are still fighting for justice, where a lot of the women and young girls were raped. So find that out. I still remember in 2003 or 4 when we were looking at some of these issues, there was a girl from Manipur. And she broke down and she said that my grandmother was raped by somebody from the armed forces or security forces. So there are these stories of intense pain wherever there's conflict. And vulnerable groups are targeted. And the peace is, okay, one part of it, of course, to the world and the need to end nuclear weapons. But the other significant part is to look at what is it that we're going to do. And which I want to talk about. One is, of course, between 2010 and 2014, the US Army in Afghanistan, Iraq, Africa and other places started something called the Human Terrain System. Okay. There is a American scholar who now works in Australia. He's done a movie called War Goes Academic. Okay. War Goes Academic. Please write down the name of the documentary. See if you can watch the film. It's a 2005 film, I think. So what is the human terrain system? It's to see in conflict areas, instead of just fighting with the enemy and people who think are allied with the enemy, can we understand the culture of the area where we are fighting? Okay. Can we understand? So therefore, they began to recruit anthropologists. So they would ground studies and therefore share insights with the army. In many areas, suicide bombing, many kinds of violence killing actually came down significantly after this. But a lot of anthropologists are very upset. They said, can you really, is this, when you're actually, this is manipulating anthropology for your, finally, the question is, should US be there? Should we be fighting there? We're not asking fundamental questions. We're again making academics as a part of control. How do you control other people using academics? And of course, as a part of this, there were at least 3 anthropologists. I think there was this person called Michael Bhatia. there was Paula, and there was Nicole. There were three of them who actually died. And I think after 2014 or 15, because of this controversy, the program was wound up. But I want to look at the learnings in terms. I'm not talking about anthropologists being used. What is it that we do? What is it that we can do to understand other cultures? And how does this understanding help us to build bridges? And the other question is in terms of, if you look at countries like India, if you look at 1 or 2 years ago, 2, 3 years ago, there was this great movement. There was a lot of demand by people in the army, something called one rank, one pension. Okay. So what is the idea of one rank, one pension? So suppose a colonel who retired in, let's say, 1994. Okay. He will be getting his pension according to the 4th Pay Commission. Somebody who retires in 2019 will get according to the 7th Pay Commission. 3rd Pay Commission and 7th Pay Commission is massive. So if inflation has gone up, why should people who served in the army earlier get less? As an idea, it's good, but imagine the kind of burden the army has in terms of having to pay pensions. And a lot of times countries have not really created funds for paying, sufficient pensions. A 2005 survey between countries in terms of how much they spent on personnel and how much was spent on weapon system in the army, in the defense forces. US, China had about 32-33%. India and France had 58%. And as countries age and as life expectancy goes up, you're also going to have a lot of this, burden of spending. So there is this whole thing about geriatric peace theory, which says the aging population. One is in terms of the number of younger people who can be productive, who can help move the economy further. Okay. That's reducing. You also have to take care of the security of older people. China also in 2002 or 3 actually faced riots because the government at that time didn't seem to have enough funds to pay for a lot of people who retired. Because you have to create a pension fund. You have to set aside money, otherwise you'll be spending from current expenditure, which is then unviable. So what happens when they're aging populations? So if you look at countries like Russia, because in a lot of advanced countries in terms of a lot of people are choosing not to have children. The population growth rates are 0 or minus. Then in that context, what happens? Will that use the possibility of war? It may not, because what will happen is that in terms of the superpowers may have less, therefore they may not want to go to war. But a lot of other countries which are smaller may not have a problem. May also begin to assert themselves. What if they have weapons of mass destruction? So the idea of geriatric peace theory is a complex and multi-dimensional problem. Because it can put pressure. Countries like India, of course, we have among the youngest of populations. So we'll have a problem with aging population maybe 30 years from now. The aging population will increase. As of now, the younger population is less. But many countries have a serious
Go on.
problem of dealing with aging population, providing for them, and also dealing with the whole issue of reduced productivity. And the other problem is in terms when you have, like, if you look at China, for a long time they had this one-child policy because they were concerned about population. Now they have serious problems of social spirit, of not enough capital. So when we are talking about the any kind of theory, I want us to definitely, in terms of read a lot more. So what I can do is, there is an interesting article by Mars, HWS, called a geriatric piece. It is again look at from the perspective of USA. I will put the article on the PSA group, or I'll send it to one of you. You can share it with the rest of the PSA group or whichever group you're in. You can read the article. A lot of the sentences slightly older. 2005 is 15 years ago. Sorry, 16 years ago. So it is something which we can read, which we can. So these are some of the things that I want to look at. So in the morning, when I was talking to my third year students on pre-state. So one of the things, as I said, is that when you talk about any area of, in terms of, if you go to this place called Bosnia-Herzegovina. Bosnia-Herzegovina is in Eastern Europe, in the Balkans. There is Serb and Bosnian populations. And in Bosnia-Herzegovina, there was something called ethnic cleansing. With the Serbs, there was mass graves of Bosnians. Graves of 300, 400 plus, and many such graves. So why does ethnic cleansing, why do people attack the community? Because somewhere historically and culturally, we look at other communities as the other, not us. So therefore, if you look at Rwanda, they've lived together in one country, Hutus and Tutsis. But they also saw the other tribe as the other. So when you see somebody else as the other, there's a huge problem. No? Then it legitimizes hatred. It legitimizes violence. So even if you look at Myanmar and Rohingyas, if you look at Sri Lanka, Sinhalese and Tamils, if you go to China, Xinjiang province, the Uyghurs, they're seen as the other, they've been put in concentration camps. The concentration camps are extremely harsh, where people are interned or held captive and subjected to harsh work, harsh punishment. So this, when you talk about peace, like if you look at, in the, I think it's in Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says is Vasudeva Kutumba. World is. So is it possible for us to look at the whole world being our family? That's important, because unless we do that, I don't think, see, I was telling students in the morning also, it's very easy for peace day to become mere tokenism. We said this, we did this, and nothing really mattered. I remember in somebody in the introduction, my introduction is becoming very cliche. This same introduction. I've heard it about 30 times till now. Multiple hats and whatever else. So next time if you have to introduce me, just say I teach political science. That is good enough introduction. Don't say the same things. I can, before you say what you want for me, I am mouthing the thing. So please don't have introductions which are repetitive. But there's a mention of Asissi. So many of us walk from different parts of Italy. We walk from a place called Gubbio to Asissi, and the last day was there was a major interfaith ceremony in the cathedral at Asissi. And I was very fascinated by the Catholic Church at that time, because the opening service in front of the altar that created a stage where Yamini Krishnamurti from India did a Bharatanatyam dance on creation. So Indian contingent, we had carried Rakis. So W Rakis, where it is like it's a promise to protect the environment. At that time I felt so good, but when I look back, it was such empty tokenism. So we can all be a part of very, interesting tokenism. So the thing is, if whatever number, we are 25, 30 of us, if all of you can work towards creating these communities, start work, start networking, start talking to different people. This we can extend to people who are hostile to us. Can we become friends? Initially, different people know we are connected to strangers, and this is our objective. How can we connect? Can we understand? That for me, I think, would be this peace day being useful. Normally, I stop in the middle and ask for questions. Today, I thought I had so many different things to talk about. So I thought I will take up questions towards the end.
Thank you, sir. We have some questions from the registration form. I will be asking them first, and then question answer round will be open for all. So the first question from our registration form was: peace is a relative concept, and long peace can lead to undesired results. Can nuclear power help to maintain efficiency of structure in long peace period?
It depends on how one defines peace. Is peace necessarily absence of conflict? Or peace a time of understanding, improving understanding, okay? Deepening understanding, deepening friendships? So if peace is about that, so if you look at Western Europe, so 1957 they started something called, Council for Economic Cooperation, which by 93 became the European Union. Therefore, it's a process. So if I just say that we are not at, so let us say, how many of us in terms of understand, do we have a problem against people in Nepal? Maybe not. Do you have a problem with people in Bhutan? Maybe not. Do people in Nepal and Bhutan like us? Significant sections in Nepal and Bhutan who don't like Indians. They think we act like big bullies. And therefore, we must be able to also, in terms of treat people like equals, be stronger. I remember in 1988, there was need for a renewal of trade and transit policy. So Nepal had two separate policies. India did not want. And they forced Nepal to come to a negotiating table. India blockaded most supplies into Nepal. So kerosene, everything goes from India, no? Because they are landlocked. There's so much of hardship. So when you say peace, it's also in terms of respecting. Respect is important. Understanding is important. Deepening of peace is important. So therefore, one must be able to build long-term sustainable structures, but sustainable structures are questioned by people. If the need to respect others, to deepen relations, is not a part of a cultural psyche. If a cultural psyche is parochial, what is parochial? My friends and me are the only people who matter, or people like us. It's a very interesting thing. If you go to different parts of the country, suppose you go to Manipur, or you're supposed to go to Kerala, or if you go to Tamil Nadu or Andhra Pradesh, wherever, and they will always say, if you're walking on a path and you see a snake and a person who belongs to the other community or the other state, whom should you kill first? And mock serious and whatever, you should kill the person from the other community first. So we have these, interesting others between states, which are not necessarily at conflict. So my thing which I want to say is, interrogate your own, I need to interrogate my own prejudices, so does each one have to. Yeah. I hope that answers the question. What's the next question?
Yes, thank you, sir. The second question was, can you please suggest a way by which democratic countries can help establish peace with authoritarian state?
When you talk about democratic countries, are they really very different from authoritarian states? We don't know. Because there are democracies like USA who have been very aggressive. A democracy like USA decided to go to war against Iraq in 2003 when the Security Council said you can't go to war. Because in any government, authoritarian or democratic, there are two kinds of people. Hawks and doves. Hawks are aggressive foreign policy. Doves are peaceful foreign policy. India has had good relations with Soviet Union for such a long time. And Soviet Union was an authoritarian state. India was a democracy. Because for political reasons, we could see commonality of interests. So good relation will depend on commonality of interests. And deepening of friendship will depend on how much we trust and how people want to travel, mingle, create works. That will depend. Yeah. What's the next question?
Yeah. Question from registration forms are done. Now we are opening question answer round. If you have any question, you can put it in chat box or you can raise your hand, and please unmute when you are identified. Does anyone have any questions? So I have one question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Shubham. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Today in the morning, we spoke about this being a utopian idea. Can you elaborate slightly more on that?
Okay. One is in terms of when you look at nation states, countries, we're competing for influence, we're competing for economic opportunities, we're competing for power. So whenever there's competition, there's always a possibility of conflict. So in such a situation, is peace a possibility? Okay. So in such a situation, isn't peace utopian? What is utopian? Impractical ideal. There's certain ideas which are practical, there's certain ideas which are not practical. So maybe in certain contexts at the moment, given the nature of those particular contexts, maybe peace may seem utopian. In 1939, if anybody had asked whether France and Germany could ever be good friends, could be part of a single confederation, The answer would have been no, impossible. It did become possible. So possibilities exist. Similarly, I was telling in class, there is, in 1926, there was an agreement called the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which was about abolishing war. It didn't work. So one has to be also in terms of cautiously optimistic. What are the kind of things we need to start doing so that it's possible to have less conflict, greater cooperation, lesser competition. Okay. Sometimes countries are led by this whole need to become more powerful, richer, so they can be aggressive. So there will be lots of situations which we will need to factor in, because before we decide, peace can become more practical. I believe that, a lot of dreams of people living together is possible. But it's possible if a lot of things happen together. To believe that it won't happen is, I think, becoming cynical. But if you believe that's happened, it will happen. What are we going to do to make it happen? I hope that answers the question. Yeah. Any question in the chat box?
Yes, sir. The next question is from Prachi. She asks, how does one identify internalized hatred?
How does one identify? This is, yeah. I think this question is very important, because a lot of us can live our entire life being oblivious to internal hatred. So what we need to look at in terms of our ability to relate to different kinds of people. So when I think of other people, do I have stereotypes in my mind of young men and women from another community or another community itself? Stereotypes often can point towards deep-seated hatred. That's one. Second, also in terms of the kind of conditioning we are exposed to continuously. Sometimes we may not even know that this is, hatred. If we may think that this is something that they deserve, or this is something, we are just paying back what they've done. So one can have all kinds of reasons. So discovering, it will take time, but also if you closely monitor your responses to different situations, your reactions to different people. Are you hesitating to talk to somebody? People from other communities, other countries. Also in terms of what is the kind of narratives of history you have imbibed. If you look at the Somnath temple, you should read David Eaton's book on Persianate age. He says that around the same time when Khilji was moving towards Somnath and he carried tent, whatever, there was, I think, the armies of Rajaraja Chola, which went up to Orissa and Calcutta and West Bengal, and they also attacked temples and they carried idols to their place. Both happened at the same time. And this is, if you look at Sanskrit narratives of the attack on Somnath, the Alauddin Khilji thing does not find as much mention as attacks from other kings as well. Sometimes we are looking at, what should we say? We have taken narratives without questioning them. So a lot of it is in terms of the narratives which we inherit. Yeah. Any question? Any other question?
Yes, sir. The next question is from Sana. She asks, what could be the possible solutions to bring peace in regions like Palestine?
See, for Palestine for Palestine or Kashmir or whenever any other area where there is, the people who are responsible for violence on both sides must be able to sit together and talk. For violence to end, a lot of oppression, real and perceived, has to end. So if that doesn't end, there can be no peace. Because peace often comes with justice. Because if there is anger and hurt, that's why if you look at South Africa, when apartheid ended, apartheid was so many hundred years of a brutal treatment of the Africans. There's a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. People wonder how effective it was, maybe to some extent. But initiatives like that, plus you also have to take, you have to reduce inequality, you have to open up opportunities for people who have been oppressed. So multiple things, it's not just dialogue. If you travel to different places, you meet people in terms of, who have suffered. And they want justice. If you ever go to Srinagar, there's an organization called Association of Parents of Disappeared Persons. And the lady who founded it is a lady called Parveena Angara. Talk to her. She has a problem of half widows. We don't know whether the person living dead, at least let us know if they are dead. Can be closure. So there are a lot of things which we will need to. We'll have to break down walls. We have to build bridges, both emotional and physical. And there's need for political will. Sometimes politically expedient to continue that kind of dispute and conflict. Sometimes some people are benefiting from dispute and conflict. So sections of the Jews, especially the extreme ones, maybe they just don't want to talk to the Arabs. They believe that Palestine is their promised land, though they were not there for more than 2,000 years. So there are different levels of issues there. Yeah.
Sir, next question is from Yamina Devi. She asks, can you elaborate Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam? Is it possible in today's world to implement such ideology?
It depends on how serious you are. First of all, when I'm talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, is that a professed value or is it a felt value? If it's a felt value, important for you, it's a lived value, you will create your own larger and larger community. Okay, so therefore, it is possible. So in terms of if I have to believe that the whole world is my family, my community, I must respect them however different they are from me. I must also understand them so that I respect, I must be able to tell them who I am, they can respect me, I must be able to respect them. So you need a certain kind of spirit. In one of the sessions, I don't know how many of you were there at that time, I talked about a Tibetan phrase called Tashe Dele. Tashe Dele is a greeting in Tibetan, in Tibetan, which means I respect the place in you where reside courage, wisdom, and compassion. See, if I truly respect that in every other person, then I am living the ideal of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. It's about us as individuals. Are we giving into prejudices? Are we helping reduce prejudices? What's the next question?
Yes. The next question is from Khushi. She asks, what is the meaning of peace for individual and for nation, and how peace can be maintained in religiously diversified country?
See, one is, as a nation, we must look at what the kind of compulsions and internal and external which a country has, and how they resolving them. We can resolve them using an approach of less aggression. We can resolve them by using aggressive tactics. So that is something which is dependent on the kind of leadership, their own agenda. So therefore, that's something which which is something which is not in our hands. One is, in a religiously diverse place, how do we build what are called syncretic traditions? How we can grow, like earlier, if you look at dargahs and things like that, where people from all religions used to go. So we need to be able to go to each other's religious places, understand their religion. So in many places that communities have lived in peace. I've known of many families in Tamil Nadu where the wife is of one religion, the husband is of another religion. In Orissa, I've met one brother is of one religion, other brothers of another religion. And they live in the same house, they have their own kind of thing, which is in a way you could together. And I have an extremely good friend of mine in Ladakh. His name is David Sonam. So he says that, in Ladakh there were families which could have Buddhists and Muslims because of marriage. And when they would eat, they would have this large bowl of soup, where each one would have their own kind of meat, either halal or jatka. They would put it in that boiling soup, where it gets cooked, and then you eat it because you pull this thing out neat. He said increasingly the practice is reducing. So, in terms of when I don't become rigid about this, and when I can find what are the ways in which we can live together, share together, while keeping intact what is important for us. Respecting other people, so where we don't impose our views on other people. That is, what I hope is possible. And in many parts of India, there are many places which have never experienced communal violence. And I'm sure there are a lot of you here who have friends from different religions. If you can be friends, and if you can be very close friends. Many of my closest friends are people from other religions. And we've been great friends for the past 40 years. It's possible. Yeah.
So, next question is from Priyanka. She asks, do you think that the concept of peaceful coexistence differs from one country to another?
See, peaceful coexistence can be between communities and between countries. So if you look at peaceful coexistence, look at maybe countries in Western Europe, look at countries in Africa where don't have conflict with each other, look at countries in Central Asia which are able to live together, look at countries in South America where countries are able to live together. So in many places it's possible for countries to have the idea of peaceful coexistence. Okay. You can also have communities, see, peaceful coexistence is mutual respect, mutual understanding. It's possible. Yeah.
So the next question is from Prachi. She asks, is the trade a catalyst for a deepening friendship or peace? If yes, can conflict be avoided if states are interdependent to fulfill economic interest?
See, if you look at yes, if there's a lot of trade and there's a lot of stake with each other, the possibility of peace becomes higher. China and India, China imports so much India imports so much from China. But we also have problems on the border because both are competing powers. So it is a possibility. And sometimes trade can coexist with a lot of tension. If you look at China and USA, they're competing for influence and power in West Pacific. And therefore they're aggressively kind of, making comments and statements and whatever else. But they're also extremely big trading partners. So trade in normal circumstances can increase, but if there's competition for power in other areas, trade is not sufficient. Yeah.
Next question is from Harpit. She asks, just like EU, do SAARC countries have a possibility of coexistence? Moreover, how effective is UN's nuclear weapon-free zone for countries when there are threats like North Korea?
Yeah, so if you look at the question in terms of, SAARC was started in early 1980s. The idea of SAARC was that while political problems between India and Pakistan and Bangladesh can continue, can we begin cooperating at a level which is, on less contentious issues. And therefore the SAARC Secretariat was set up in Nepal, and the Secretary General will keep rotating between countries. And in 1995, we started something called SAPTA, South Asian Proliferation Trade Agreement, which was supposed to be to lay down the path where we could move towards a reality like EU. But that didn't really take off yet. And after 2009 and 10, with terrorist attack and others, and the conflict between India and Pakistan has become so severe that a lot of SAARC summits have not happened at all. So economic cooperation and other cooperation can take place. First, at the political level, we need to become friends. So if we can't become friends, then that's not a possibility. Yeah.
Shravani wants to ask some question. Shravani, are you in the meet?
Please, yes, can I ask?
At least when somebody has to talk, at least
Sir,
ऐसे मत behave
actually,
करो
I
जब
read
सामने
about this
बैठो.
that Chinese government is saying that they deleted that post after some time, but they just posted this thing that China have a no first use policy, but they are going to like they decided that Japan will be an exception. So this was a really dangerous thing because Chinese people also supported this thing. So what do you think about this? Like, is this wrong, right? And how world can come together to fight all these kind of aggressions?
Okay. First thing is talking about China and Japan. China and Japan are competing economies. China and Japan are also competing over claims over many small islands which lie between both of them. Okay. As I said, in any government, there will be hawks and there will be doves. There are some of them who would like to kind of, make aggressive statements. And therefore, that kind of aggressive statements may not really lead to anything. And if you're saying that in terms of when you say that Chinese people also support it,
वो जैसे ही मेरा नाम
if you
लेंगे
look
मेरे
at
को
India,
बोलना है और मेरे को पता नहीं वो कब मेरा नाम लेंगे इसीलिए
most of us support
या तो
any kind
ले लो
of
अभी
statement or thing
देख
against
लो मैं
Pakistan.
बताऊंगी
We do. So it depends on what is the kind of narrative, popular and political, which has been built over time. Because when you're talking about, your media, your government, we can always demonize, we can always show somebody else in very bad light. So therefore, in the US also, at one time, they used to hate communism and Soviet Union. So it depends on what is the kind of, communication at multiple levels which is happening. Yeah.
Sir, do you want to take some more questions?
Yeah. Yeah, another 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. So next question is from Priyanka. She asked, do you think COVID-19 period has helped to bring countries together in peace formation, or it has widened the gaps between underdeveloped and developed countries?
See, in the context of cooperation to contain the virus in terms of vaccines, there's been a lot of cooperation. But that is something which is again a response in a certain crisis.
इधर रखो किचन
But
में
deep down, if we as people are not willing to really
फिर
see the other country as an ally and
पानी भर देना
see them as competitors, then COVID or no COVID in of long term, it will not really make much of a difference. So yes, to some extent, COVID did help countries together because it was a collective problem we are dealing with. But the collective problem didn't make our personal agendas as countries, our own rivalries, our own need to gain advantage. Those things didn't go away. So unless those go away, long-term change will not take place. A lot of people ask me in terms of, always ask me in terms of, because of COVID, will people become more conscious of hygiene and things like that? It has to be with their psyche. I see a lot of people even now when I'm on the road, people in cars will open the doors and spit. And that COVID spreads through, aerosols. People on bicycles, walking. So, you've not really changed. Circumstances force you to stay inside, put a mask on. On the road, see, if there was no fine, how many people they actually take precautions?
Don't sit on that.
So many people use mask as chin guard. It doesn't really cover anything. So the whole question of, so unless there is change from at a deep level, these things will not change anything in the long run.
Just one note before next question. All participants, please fill the feedback form. Priyanka has posted it in the chat box. The next question is from Shubham. Shubham, are you in the lead?
Yes. Sir, a few days ago in the lecture, we were talking about Quad. And in this year's Malabar exercise, we are sending ships to the South China Sea. Yeah. And last week, I think we also spoke about this being public posturing and all of that. Today, you said that India, US, Japan are not really allies in its true sense. So, to what extent is sending warships to South China Sea just bravado?
See, I don't know whether it's bravado, but see, this whole idea of Quad itself is basically the only reason why these countries are coming. So India sees China as a major threat. Japan sees China as a major threat. US sees China as a major threat in West Pacific. And therefore, it's that threat which is making us really come together. At other levels, in terms of operation, many things, there are still areas which we are not really cooperating. But India also wants to be taken seriously as a significant, superpower in the Indian Ocean and in the seas. And therefore, from the Eastern Command, we are sending as a part of this process. So it's more in terms of, partly public posturing, partly sending a message saying that we can get together. But unless there is, like if you look at NATO, there is a very common, clear bond which talks about collective security, which made it last for more than 70 years. So Quad, at that sense, in terms of, we are, there is so much of difference in terms of the capabilities, military and otherwise. So in terms of work, I don't. And the Quad itself, in terms of, is it really a kind of a formal agreement? That's also not sure. It's taking its own time. What we come out of it, I wouldn't know, because in terms of the oceans, India, China, say India and Australia cannot, and Japan cannot really take on China. Because if you look at the number of ships, all kinds of ships taken together in India, it's 150 ships. The number of naval ships which China has, about 300. If you look at the Coast Guard, which is a separate force, some of its ships in the advanced naval ships. So these exercises are maybe some kind of shows of strength, but in terms of long term, what is the kind of impact, or whether it will push China to the negotiating table? All of this is no evidence. But it is also a kind of a show of strength. It's also India emphasizing that you need to take us seriously. These kind of messages.
Yes, sir. Next question is from Anmol. He asks, how do we see Rawls' law of people in building peace?
Now, see, when you talk about the idea of I don't know how many of you are from second year. See, Rawls, John Rawls was a person who, in 1971, he wrote a book called The Theory of. In 1993, he wrote a book called Political Liberalism, and in 2003, he wrote a book called The Law of the People. So basically, is extending the idea of liberal ideas, including liberal ideas of justice, to the international community. So that needs certain kind of assumptions. That is based on certain kind of assumptions, whether the liberal order is something which is really good, how will it work, will countries really want to accommodate less developed countries. So as a principle, and at the international level, really taken it too seriously. We're also not seen very much as a person who is seen as having the expertise to talk about in international politics.
Yes. And last question is by Kisha.
Yeah.
Kisha.
So, sir, you had mentioned that in the Test Ban Treaty, India had refused to sign it, saying that when Israel, Pakistan, and Iran will sign it, we will sign it. So, like, if such sort of situation ever comes in the future.
Let me make a correction.
Yeah.
India, it's one of the reasons these are not signing. But India's reason was not that. India said that it will sign if all the nuclear powers also agree by 2020, 25 years, that they will also end all nuclear weapons, because otherwise it will be an unfair world. No, there are 5 countries or 6 countries which have nuclear weapons, and the rest of the countries, they are saying you disarm. I mean, you don't develop nuclear weapons. So for India, it was a matter of principle in that. Second, in terms of practical concept, because Pakistan was also developing a nuclear weapon, China already had nuclear weapons. So if neighbors had nuclear weapons, then it would do that. But India's this principle is something which I thought made sense. No, if USA and others were pressurizing India to sign, but they themselves at no point of time would they want to give up nuclear weapons. Then it's not really a fair kind of principle. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So I just wanted to ask that if such sort of situation ever comes in the future, like should the global powers like tackle this? Because like we could have much more serious problems and we cannot give this situation that if this country signs, we will sign. So how can one tackle that situation?
No, but I'm saying when you talk about nuclear powers, India's position of the moratorium thing is true. No, why should there be this international apartheid? Then some countries have nuclear weapons and no other countries should not have. Because the logic is, if we believe other countries should not have, then those who have should also agree. At the moment, it's important for our security. We'll work over 25 years to make sure that the security concerns don't have a reason for us to have nuclear weapons. Yeah, that's the thing.
This marks the end of our question and answer session. Does anyone have any question? Okay. So there is a question from Harpreet. She asks, What about the Cochrane nuclear test?
You see, at Cochrane, 2 nuclear tests happened. One happened in 1974 when we had a fission test. And then in 1998, we had again at Cochrane, where we had a fusion nuclear test. And in 1973 and 74, India said that our concerns are still peaceful. We are not really going to develop a nuclear arsenal. In 1998, we said that if the situation it's becoming so tense, we feel it's important for us to have that. So Cochrane test was a part of this whole reason why India didn't want to sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Also, within a few months of India testing its thermonuclear weapons, Pakistan also tested. So therefore, that is because it's a part of our what we claim that it just makes us secure that other countries will not take for granted because we can also retaliate with that. Okay, so therefore, that is the justification. Yeah.
Sir, would you take more questions or?
Now, if there are one or two, I'll finish that if there are any.
Okay. So there is a question from Khushi. She says, even having a United Nations organization, why world is unable to maintain global peace?
When you talk about the United Nations organization, everyone must understand that the United Nations organization is an intergovernment agency. What does that mean? That United Nations cannot force any country to accept what it says. So United Nations is a body where countries together must agree to do something. So the first thing is we must understand that all of us are what are called sovereign nation states. We're independent nation states. So we will not take any kind of order from any other organization. That is true for USA, that's true for India. So nature of the world order, when they are sovereign nations, we believe that security, they are the best judge. So therefore, the United Nations can only do when sovereign nations agree. Like what Anita has posted saying that where the jurisdiction of the nation state ends, where the sovereignty of the jurisdiction of the United Nations ends, where sovereignty of the nation state begins. Whether in terms of border or any decisions also. Okay. That's the important thing. So you cannot really fault the UN, but through the UN there have been a lot of initiatives, at least in the UN where people are willing to talk, sometimes they move towards peace. But in the world where independent countries are like, if you say, like UN doesn't have its own army, UN doesn't have its own, resources. So in a country like USA in 2003 ignores what the Security Council said, then what can one do? So there's a serious problem in terms of the world order where independent countries, whether it's India or China or Pakistan or Israel or USA, will often refuse to accept what the UN says. Okay, is that all?
With this, we end with our question answer round.
Thank you so much.
Sir, ruko, sir. Vote of thanks.
What?
Vote of thanks. Sir, nahi. Please. Sir, nahi, please. Okay. So I'm Atharva and it's honor to give vote of thanks on behalf of PSA for this session. It was truly an enlightening session, sir. A topic like nuclear conflict, real politics, geographical conflicts, and its effects on countries and ultimately in our life is definitely an issue which we should focus on. The issue with peace is it is hard to maintain it properly, and dealing with prejudice and hate, we must see the topic from different point of view to understand the issue at large extent. We all learned so much today. Thank you, sir, for an informative session and answering all of our questions patiently and solving our doubts. And least but not, I would like to thank all the participants here to making this session